The dense fog clung to the narrow mountain path as Kenji, a freelance photographer, made his way towards the forgotten village of Shirakawa. The village, abandoned decades ago, was said to be a place where time stood still. Kenji had heard whispers of its existence from an old man in a nearby town, stories of unexplained phenomena and shadows that moved without a source. Intrigued by the mystery and eager to capture its eerie beauty, he ventured into the heart of Gifu's mountains, his camera and audio recorder his only companions. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, the kind that settles in your bones and whispers of unseen eyes watching your every move. Kenji tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to the isolation and the stories he'd heard. But as he stepped into the village, the silence was deafening. The wooden houses, weathered by time, stood as silent sentinels to a past long forgotten. Kenji began his work, capturing the haunting beauty of the village. The click of his camera echoed through the empty streets, a stark contrast to the silence that enveloped him. It was during one of these moments that he first felt it, a presence, something just beyond his peripheral vision. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Shrugging it off as his imagination, he continued, unaware that his audio recorder was picking up faint whispers, voices that spoke in a language he couldn't understand. The whispers grew louder as the day wore on, though Kenji heard nothing with his own ears. It wasn't until he played back the recordings that night in his tent that he realized something was terribly wrong. The voices were clear now, pleading, crying, some even laughing. But the most chilling part was the moment when the whispers stopped, and a single voice, clear as day, said his name. Kenji's blood ran cold. He was alone in these mountains, miles from the nearest town. Who, or what, could have known his name? The next morning, Kenji packed his equipment with trembling hands, the unshakable feeling of being watched more intense than ever. As he left the village, he couldn't resist one last look back. There, in the window of one of the abandoned houses, stood a shadowy figure, its face obscured by the morning mist. Kenji didn't wait to see more. He ran, the whispers following him even as the village faded into the distance. Back in the safety of his Tokyo apartment, Kenji tried to convince himself it was all in his head. But the recordings told a different story. The whispers were still there, growing louder each time he listened. And then, one night, as he lay in bed, he heard it again, the voice, clear and unmistakable, calling his name from the darkness of his own room. The script ends with Kenji sitting in silence, the audio recorder in his hands, the whispers a constant reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some villages are forgotten for a reason. Break time equals fives. Greater than the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as I trudged along the overgrown path, my backpack weighing heavily on my shoulders. I had ventured into the heart of Shikoku, lured by the promise of untouched nature and the thrill of exploration. But as the trees thickened and the sounds of civilization faded, a quiet unease settled in my chest. The air was still, too still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. My map had indicated a small village ahead, a potential place to rest for the night. What I found, however, was far from welcoming. The village was deserted, its wooden houses standing like silent sentinels against the encroaching dusk. The windows, dark and empty, seemed to watch me as I passed. The first house I peered into was frozen in time, dust coating every surface. But it was the dolls that caught my eye, traditional Japanese dolls, their porcelain faces eerily lifelike in the fading light. I could have sworn their eyes followed me as I moved. Shaking off the feeling, I continued to the next house, only to find the same unsettling scene. This time, however, as I turned to leave, a soft whisper seemed to echo from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. There was no one there. The dolls, though. Had they moved? I could have sworn the one by the window was facing the other way when I first entered. Paranoia began to claw at my mind. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the old wood beneath my feet sent my pulse racing. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, a whisper, so faint I might have imagined it, but it was there. This time, It was closer. I bolted, my feet pounding against the dirt path as I fled the village. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent, until they were all around me, a chorus of unseen voices. I didn't stop running until the village was far behind me, until the only sound was my own ragged breathing. But even then, in the safety of my tent beneath the stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching me. The next morning, I retraced my steps, determined to prove to myself that it had all been in my head. But the village was gone. In its place was only dense forest, as if it had never existed. Yet, as I turned to leave, a single doll lay in the path before me, its painted smile knowing, its eyes reflecting the morning sun. I left it there, walking away as fast as I could. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear the whispers, and I wonder if the village is still out there, waiting for the next traveler to stumble upon its secrets. Break time equals 5s, greater than the wind howled through the skeletal remains of Aomori's forgotten hamlet, a place time seemed to have abandoned. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something indefinably stale, like the breath of the past itself. I, an urban explorer drawn to the allure of desolation, had come seeking the silence of places left behind. Yet, as I stepped into the first house, my boots disturbing the thick layer of dust on the floor, I realized I was not alone. The footprints were fresh, impossibly so, leading from the door to the center of the room where they simply stopped. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat of primal fear. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations, an animal, another explorer, anything but what my gut screamed at me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of the old house settling, or was it something moving just out of sight? My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. I told myself it was the wind, the old wiring, anything but the presence I felt watching me from the darkness. Then, a whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it, but it came again, a voice not my own, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the beam of my failing light. I backed towards the door, my every instinct screaming to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm, and in the chaos, I saw them, figures in the shadows, their forms shifting, never quite solid. I don't remember how I got out, only the sensation of hands pulling at my clothes, the sound of my own screams drowning in the cacophony of whispers. When I came to, I was outside, the first light of dawn creeping over the mountains. The hamlet stood silent once more, as if it had never stirred. But I know what I heard, what I felt. And the footprints, they were gone, erased as if they had never been. Yet, in the dust of my own boots, I found a single strand of hair, long and black, not mine. The hamlet is quiet now, but I hear the whispers in my dreams, calling me back. And the worst part? Some nights, I want to go. Break time equals 5s, greater than the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the deserted streets of the abandoned village in Nagano. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of a dilapidated wooden structure. Dr. Aiko Tanaka, a cultural anthropologist, moved carefully through the village, her camera in hand, documenting the forgotten homes that stood as silent witnesses to a community that had vanished decades ago. Her research focused on the stories these abandoned places could tell, the lives that had been lived within their walls, and the reasons they had been left behind. But as dusk settled in, the atmosphere shifted subtly, the air growing colder, the silence more profound. Aiko checked her watch, realizing she had lost track of time. She decided to make her way back to her car before nightfall, but as she turned down a narrow alley, she heard it, a child's laughter, clear and bright, echoing off the empty buildings. The sound sent a shiver down her spine. She stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. There was no response, only the fading echo of laughter that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Aiko's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the area, her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering darkness. The windows of the abandoned houses stared back at her like empty eye sockets, offering no clues. She told herself it was just the wind, or perhaps an animal, but the laughter had been unmistakably human. The rational part of her mind struggled to make sense of it, while another, more primal part urged her to flee. Taking a deep breath, Aiko forced herself to continue, her steps quickening as she made her way back to the main road. The laughter came again, closer this time, sending a wave of terror through her. She broke into a run, her bag bouncing against her side, her breath coming in short gasps. As she reached her car, she fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Just as she was about to open the door, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck, and a whisper, so faint she almost missed it, "Stay with us." Aiko didn't dare look back. She threw herself into the car, slamming the door shut and locking it. As she drove away, the village receding in her rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The laughter echoed in her mind long after she had left the village behind, a haunting reminder of the unexplained phenomena that lurked in Japan's forgotten villages. The experience left her with more questions than answers, and a deep unease that she couldn't rationalize away. She never returned to the village, but sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she could still hear the whispering shadows calling her name. Break time equals 5s, greater than the air in the secluded village of Fukui was thick with an unspoken history, a place where time seemed to stand still, and the modern world felt like a distant memory. The traveler, a man named Daniel, had come here seeking solitude and a break from the relentless pace of city life. He had read about the village in an obscure travel blog, its description painting a picture of serene beauty and untouched nature. But as he set up his campsite on the outskirts of the village, a sense of unease settled over him, like the quiet before a storm. The villagers, few as they were, had been polite but distant, their eyes avoiding his as if he carried some unseen burden. Night fell quickly, and with it came an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Daniel slept fitfully, his dreams filled with indistinct whispers and shadows that moved just beyond his vision. When he woke at dawn, the first thing he noticed was the cold. It seeped into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Then he saw them, intricate patterns etched into the dirt around his tent, spirals and lines that formed symbols he didn't recognize. They hadn't been there when he went to sleep. His breath came in short, panicked gasps as he scrambled out of his tent, his heart pounding in his chest. The patterns were everywhere, encircling his campsite in a perfect, unbroken line. The dirt was disturbed, but there were no footprints leading to or from the designs, as if they had appeared from thin air. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, only to find it dead, the screen black and unresponsive. The village was silent, not even the sound of birds to break the stillness. He packed his things with hurried, clumsy movements, his mind racing with explanations that slipped away like water through his fingers. Was it a prank? But who would do such a thing, and why? The rational part of his brain screamed for him to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. Yet, as he turned to go, a whisper floated on the wind, so faint he might have imagined it. It was his name, spoken in a voice that was not human. Daniel froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The whisper came again, this time from behind him. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, a presence so palpable it felt like a physical weight on his shoulders. With a burst of adrenaline, he ran, his feet pounding against the earth as he fled towards the path that led out of the village. He didn't stop until he reached his car, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the key in the ignition. As he drove away, the village disappearing in his rearview mirror, the whispers followed him, growing louder with each passing mile. Days later, back in the safety of his apartment, Daniel tried to convince himself it had all been a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by stress and isolation. But the photos he had taken of the patterns were gone, deleted from his phone as if they had never existed. And sometimes, in the dead of night, He would wake to the sound of whispering, his name carried on a breeze that shouldn't have been there. The village, with its forgotten secrets and silent watchers, had marked him. And Daniel knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that it wasn't done with him yet. Break time equals fives, greater than the sun was beginning to set as the group of friends arrived at the outskirts of the abandoned village in Okinawa. The air was thick with humidity, and the only sounds were the distant calls of cicadas and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The village, forgotten by time, stood silently, its wooden structures weathered and worn, some barely standing. The friends, drawn by stories of the village's mysterious past and the allure of the unknown, had decided to explore it despite the local warnings. As they stepped onto the overgrown path leading into the village, a sudden chill ran down their spines, a stark contrast to the warm evening air. Their phones, which had been functioning perfectly moments before, suddenly flickered and died, leaving them in silence. The first whispers came as a soft murmur, indistinguishable at first, growing slightly louder as if carried by the wind. They looked at each other, confusion and a hint of fear in their eyes, but no one admitted to hearing anything. Then, the feeling of something brushing against their skin, light as a feather but unmistakable, sent shivers down their spines. One friend gasped, and the others turned to see a look of sheer terror on their face. "Did you feel that?" they asked, voice trembling. No one wanted to answer, but their wide eyes and pale faces said it all. The whispers grew louder, now clearly voices, though no words could be understood. The friends huddled closer, their breaths quickening, as the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from one of the dilapidated houses, sending birds scattering into the sky. That was the breaking point. Without a word, they turned and ran, the whispers following them, growing more insistent, more desperate. They didn't stop until they reached the safety of their car, hearts pounding, sweat cooling on their skin. As they drove away, the village disappeared into the darkness behind them, but the whispers seemed to linger in their ears, a haunting reminder of their encounter. None of them spoke about what happened that night, but the experience bound them together in a silent understanding. The village, and whatever dwelled within its shadows, remained a mystery, its secrets kept by those who dared to listen to its whispers.